in that scenario then that we want to begin to think outside of the box of civil rights and begin to deal with our human rights. And the teach-ins are done with the idea of really letting us know what those human rights are. A couple of things I'll say, and then I'll stop. For instance, in civil rights law, particularly since the Reagan years, they changed the way that you could do class action suits. They changed the way that you could get a lawsuit done, particularly around racial discrimination. And the way that that change came down is that during the Reagan years, they did a little shell game and sleight of hand, and by saying that the only way that you can really charge credibly a charge of discrimination or racism on an institutional level is that you must be able to prove intent. You have to prove that they intended to mess you over. So you have to prove that the cop intended to racially profile you when he beat you in the head and locking you up, like what they did to the retired school teacher who 2 weeks after Katrina was just trying to go and get some cigarettes. You have to prove that the institution intended to leave you behind and not look at the effect. In international law, it's the reverse. They're not really concerned about intent because they know that the governments all the time come up with laws and come up with rationale and come up with all kinds of lofty language which says that they have the greatest intention, but they are looking at the effect. So then in the international forum, they're not concerned with proving a civil rights violation, looking at intent. They're looking at the effect. And that's really what we want to focus in on today, is that we don't know what their intentions are. Matter of fact, I don't think they even know what their intentions are. But in the lack of knowing what their intentions are, we see the dangerous effect of them having violated our civil rights and our human rights by disregarding our humanity. That much is clear. So we need to think in those terms. When I presented to the Human Rights Committee, I was presenting because of violations, treaty violations, that I was alleging that the United States had done under something called the ICCPR, which is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And there were at least 3 separate and distinct articles that the United States violated, and if not more, and that's not the only treaty that was violated. They violated Article 26, which is loosely based on the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which came about as a result of the end of slavery, which is supposed to guarantee equal protection of the laws. Nowhere in the Constitution and Bill of Rights is there language specifically designed to protect the rights of poor people. Nowhere in the Constitution and Bill of Rights is there language that even envisions a class of people called poor that need protection by civil society. But in the United Nations documents, you see that those documents not only are talking about racial and gender and other forms of discrimination, but they specifically cite out ways that people who don't have power, who don't have property, can also be discriminated against, and they too should be a protected class. Article 23, which has to do with families. You treaty is supposed to be the supreme law of the land. Probably what you don't realize is that the treaty, there are 7 human rights treaties. The United States has only signed on to 3 of them. To show you an example of the hypocrisy, recently we've heard about the government wanting to subpoena and confiscate Yahoo searches and Google searches or the computer because they're trying to find people who are surfing the internet for child pornography. You heard that, right? I'm not just making this up in California. You heard that also. Good. I thought that was my imagination. So this is what they say. But there's an actual treaty that deals with child pornography and child exploitation, and the rights of the child in the United States has not even ratified. So then where's the real concern right there about getting your Yahoo records and your Google searches to see what you've really been looking at? So then we just want to wrap this part up by saying that we want to think outside of the box that we've been put in. And the last thing that I'll say, in particular regarding civil rights, and in honor of Dr. King, I have to put this year up. 1965, which is the year of the signing of the Voting Rights Act. Many of you don't realize, or might not realize, that as African Americans, our voting rights are not permanent features of our citizenship. They are conditioned, they're tertiary, they're ad hoc, and they're up for review within the next 12 to 14 months by Congress. We don't even have permanent voting rights in the United States. And we recognize from Katrina that we definitely don't have our human rights here. So then, as long as there's a displaced population in Louisiana, as long as the government does nothing to return them, as long as the government keeps them out and goes ahead with this election that they're trying to do within the next couple of weeks, these are violations of the enforcement provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Dr. King stood over the shoulder of President Johnson and watching him sign. Now, some would say that we've had all kinds of rights. And I'll just conclude by saying that actually in the 1860s, African American men had the right to vote, and there were a number of civil rights acts that happened during Reconstruction. But if we had the right to vote, why would we need a Voting Rights Act 100 years later? If we had civil rights right after the Civil War, why would we need a civil rights movement? If we had human rights 7 months ago, then why would we have the need to find out now how our human rights have been violated as a result of the government's the Hurricane Katrina attack? So this concludes this part of it, but this is the box that we must think ourselves out of as we try to gain freedom for ourselves as well as justice